Hi, everybody. Jim Ostrowski back with the Liberty Moving podcast. I did not retire. Straighten my hoodie out here a little bit. No, I didn't retire. I got super busy with the day job. Spent about 3 weeks working on what we call post-relief litigation. Somebody's been convicted, lose their appeal, and then they hire me. Sounds fun, huh? So, I had to file a brief. I'm trying to get this guy out of Attica after 14 years. And after, my opinion, he did not get a fair trial. It'll be up to the judge. I filed my brief. Excuse me, sorry. So, haven't done a podcast in a few weeks. I'll be doing a lot more because my schedule lightens up at this point, for the end of the year. Got to get my studio here intact. So, I want to talk about ideology. I spend a lot of time talking about ideology, writing about ideology, thinking about ideology. Sometimes that's a bit of a surprise to the people who the Facebook algorithm bring on the site. So I just did this little typology or taxonomy of ideologies. Some of the ideology, I didn't include them all. I got criticized for not including them all. It's like, okay, well, when I get there, I'll get there. Thanks for letting me know how to do my research. And let's talk a little bit about that chart that I posted a couple weeks ago. Actually, quite by accident. It was really kind of a throwaway thing. I used my Facebook page as kind of a writer's notebook. A lot of writers throughout history have had their notebooks or their diaries, and most of those people are way more energetic than I am, so I never really had one. But Facebook and really social media in general have got me into the habit of, I wake up in the morning and I just put some thoughts on paper. And some of these thoughts have turned into books, and some of them turned into articles or podcasts or whatever. And I don't know, it's just the way of getting creative ideas started. So some people, I guess, took it a little overly serious. So let's just go in and let's talk about that chart that I posted and what it meant, what it didn't mean, why it's incomplete, and so on. So it's been my view for some time that what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to crack the code of the leading ideologies. So I started that dominate American politics. I'm primarily concerned with the United States because I live here. But these ideologies are sort of replicated in their own way, mutatis mutandis, in other countries. But I'm primarily concerned with the United States because I live here. It's the most powerful country. It's the leading country on earth. And it's the most libertarian country. So, it's not really the most libertarian country. It's the country where that was founded on libertarian principles. And it's still one of the more relatively libertarian countries. I'm not saying, I wouldn't stake my reputation that it's the most libertarian country. I really don't think it is, whatever. So I started out, I got to get across the street here. Hold on a second. I started out with progressivism. I wrote the book and published the book in 2014 and started working on the project in 2012. I'm good on dates. Don't ask me how I know that, but that is the date. So if you do the math, in 2012, I'm not too good at math. I guess I've been working on this for 13 years. Let's see, 12 plus 13, whatever, 25. So I've been working on this for 13 years. I'm not so the people who come onto the site have to understand. I've been working on this for 13 years. And I wrote a book called Progressivism, a primer. And to me, the reason I wrote that book is that I concluded that the ruling ideology of the United States was small p progressivism. But I felt that there wasn't really a clear definition of that, and the term was also used, actually not so much at that time, but there was always a meaning of progressive that's pertaining to the left wing of the Democratic Party, and that's not really what I'm driving at. But now the word progressivism has come to mean, in many contexts, leftist, and I think that's a very unfortunate development. Very unfortunate development. Why use the word progressive to mean leftist when we have a perfectly good word called leftist around? So this stuff drives me crazy. I'm probably the only guy you know who's ever written a dictionary. I'm rather obsessed with the meaning of words. And it's not just like some autistic thing or some attempt to be pedantic and show how smart I am. No, it's not. It's the fact that words are super important in politics. Words are, they're weapons in a way. They're tools. And if your words are fuzzy, then you're disabled in advancing your goal. So, for an example, if you don't have a word for the American regime, if you don't have a word for the ideology underlying the American regime, please tell me how you're going to combat that regime. You can't even communicate to other people what is the regime? What's the ideology of the regime without a word? And we didn't have a fucking word. I'm telling you, I was there. One of the things the newbies have to realize, I've been in this game for 50 years. Every once in a while I like to brag that I met George McGovern. I mean, I didn't know the guy that well, but he came to my speech and I talked to him afterwards. I think I could say I knew the guy. I've been in the game a long time. So in 2012, in the aftermath of the Ron Paul revolution, I wrote a book that tried to accomplish a lot. But one of the things I tried to accomplish, and I did accomplish, was I labeled and defined the ruling ideology of the U.S. at that time and still. And it's progressivism. And I concluded in that book that part of the nature of the progressive ideology is that it is not based on reason or logic or fact or history or experience. It is a form of emotional therapy. And I don't know how much I want to drill down into this. I have a certain methodology. I'm not the historian of ideas. What I do is I created this methodology myself, and if it's not valid, then it's not valid. I think it is valid. What I tried to do in, God, I meant this to be a short podcast, but here I go. What I intended to do in the progressivism book, and I'll get to the chart, believe me. Still got a mile to go or so before I hit Hurdle Avenue. So what I did is I reverse engineered what people actually think. And of course, the only way I know how they think is by what they say and what they do. But I assume that when people say something, they think it, unless they're lying, and you have to do that whole analysis. So I reverse engineered this progressive mindset by taking the words and actions of just sort of average people, but also people in the media and people in politics. And I specifically studied Chuck Schumer. He's not mentioned in the book, but I'll have to buy him dinner one day when I hit 1 million copies. Thanks, Chuck. I wrote a book inspired by you. I specifically had in mind Brian Higgins, my local congressman, a rather obscure figure nationally, but not to me. It's from my neighborhood. And just the way people that I knew talked about politics. And so I reverse engineered it, and I concluded, what I think is true about progressivism is that it's a form of emotional therapy. Because, and I won't go into the whole analysis because there's just no time in this pie. You know, the book is the book. It's out there. It's sold 13,000 copies. It's been read by 20 to 25,000 people. With no marketing, no minimal marketing, no agent, no nothing, no PR firm, just its own merit. And so then I said, well, leftism had become kind of resurgent post 2014, the Ferguson riots. And I said, I could kick myself for not getting this book out, but I decided to write a book about leftism. And so I have an outline, I have a detailed outline. I know what the book's going to say. I just have to sit down and write it. And I just haven't had the time. I don't have a sugar daddy paying me to do stuff. I often joke every commentator should have his leading donor stamped on his forehead, and my forehead would be blank because my leading donor is myself. So I have a theory of leftism, and when I started to think about it, I said, well, this is kind of like progressivism in the sense that leftism is also a form of emotional therapy. I don't think leftism makes a lick of sense rationally, logically, historically, empirically, experientially, whatever. But I do think that it serves a very powerful, emotionally satisfying function in the life of the leftist. And so that's that. And then the other major ideology that I'm writing a book about, which is outlined in detail. I know pretty much exactly what I'm going to say. But again, I need the word processing time. So if you want to throw me a grant of 25 grand, I will deliver that book in 3 to 5 months. But nobody's throwing me that money. I'm not asking for that money. I'm just saying the book's outline. I know what I'm going to say, but it hasn't been published. Yeah, but I use it. So that's the third ideology, which is sort of a mega ideology because it sort of encompasses the other ideologies and it sort of sits on top. And you could divide all the ideologies into either archism, which is what I'm talking about, or anti-archism. So archism is basically the belief that there should be one or more states in this world, and I also have concluded, based on hearing people talk and reading people, carefully weighing the argumentation, that ultimately it's pretty easy to demonstrate that archism, while it purports to have rational argumentation, is really not rational at all. It's pretty easily refuted. In fact, I'll give you a quick example. So what's the definition of archism? The definition of archism is there should be one or more states in this world. Okay. And then so the anti-archist would say, well, one or more states, how many states? And it's my contention that the archist, the proponent of this theory, can never really explain how many states there should be because he would get involved in a contradiction in his own theory. I'm not going to prove that. I'm not going to delve into that because that's not the point. So I've had this for a number of years. I know I wrote an article in the Niagara Falls Reporter, which is essentially defunct. So I know it was like 5 or 6 years ago, where I alluded to all three theories. So I've had this theory that these leading ideologies are forms of emotional therapy, or really a form of psychotherapy. I'm using that as somewhat metaphorical. You could quibble with that, but I think it's accurate in a metaphorical sense. So this is what all I said on the chart was taxonomy of leading ideologies and whether they're psychotherapeutic or rationalistic. Now, it just occurred to me really the other day, of course I've thought about the issues, is libertarianism, which is my own view, is that also a form of psychotherapy? And there are arguments for that. There's been many analyses of libertarian personality types and why libertarians become libertarians, and it serves some psychological need. And I don't deny that there's some of that, but I think that if you get to the essence of libertarianism and the essence of why most people become libertarians, it's not because libertarianism is a particularly seductive form of emotional therapy, because libertarianism promises very little. In fact, we're constantly getting a little warm. We're constantly trashed because of how little we promise and how much we expect the individuals in society to do on their own with a minimal state or no state at all, as in the belief system of some libertarians. So I rather just sort of casually threw libertarianism on there as rationalistic. Now, I chose the term very carefully. In fact, if you look up rationalistic, it's the meaning that pops up is not exactly what I intended. And keep in mind, so there's no God of the dictionary. People use language in an attempt to communicate with others, and certainly language is constantly evolving, and not to brag, but writers have a huge role to play in those evolving meanings. And so what I meant by rationalistic is not sort of an overly rationalistic view that doesn't take into account empirical information and so on. It's not what I meant. There is that form of hyper-rationalism which I think is out there, which should be scrutinized and criticized. All they meant was that when the historical libertarians, and the current, the modern resurgence of the libertarian movement, and people like me who are constantly hammering out the ideology, we're primarily trying to come up with a logical or rational argument or empirical argumentation, historical arguments, as opposed to like sitting down and saying, we need to come up with an ideology that will immediately get 95% of the people in the country on our side. And I think it's pretty obvious when you look at it, and I know a lot of the critics who came to the site have not looked at it. They know almost nothing about libertarianism. But I do. I knew the founder of the modern movement, Rothbard. I was a student. I know it well. I came in as a philosophy major, and it was the syllogisms that got me. So, and I'm not the only one. There's a predominant number of, quote, scientist-type personalities, which is only 2% of the population. It's my recollection from hearing that years ago. There's an inordinate number of libertarian scientist types, and this is well known in the movement. It's like a running joke in the movement. This type of personality dominates the movement and dominates the argumentation of the movement. So really, that's all I was pointing out, I wasn't saying that, and in a little chart that I casually posted on Facebook, I wasn't saying that libertarianism is true. I was talking about the dominant methodology of libertarians, which is rationalistic. I can't think of another word to use. I wish there was. And I tried to explain to people, I didn't say rational. You've got to carefully read what I'm saying, because I use words very carefully. All I said was that you've got these three ideologies, which in my view are predominantly forms of emotional therapy. People can push back at that. You're certainly free to argue that progressivism in the Woodrow Wilson, Teddy Roosevelt sense, oh no, now if you look at the book Progressivism, I talk about how the original progressives thought that they were adopting a scientific approach. But what I was missing in my research was any evidence of the scientific approach. They portrayed themselves as it's just like pseudo-scientific approach, but there was no science behind it, and I explain why. In Progressives, I refute progressivism pretty easily in the book, and I intend to do the same thing with leftism. I intend to do the same thing with anarchism. That'll be the final book about politics, maybe my final book ever if I live long enough to write it, and it's a priority of mine. Working on creating the infrastructure where I can get all these books out pretty quickly. So, and again, the distinction between those three and libertarianism is libertarianism, if you study the origin of it, it comes out of sort of medieval natural law. It's very abstract, it's very deductive, that's the nature of the argumentation. It's buttressed by Austrian economics, which came along a couple hundred years after the theory was propounded. And Austrian economics is notoriously abstract and deductive and, arguably a prioristic, and not, famously criticized by Milton Friedman for not being falsifiable and not being empirically verifiable. So that's all I was saying, and I hope I've clarified some things. I'm coming up on hurdle. I'm gonna grab some coffee at Dash's. Buy local for Liberty. Another free ad for Dash's. Someday they're gonna give me a free fish fry coupon. Mr. Dash, please. Just kidding. No, I love the place, and he hired my son through college, and I appreciate what he did for the neighborhood, and I support him without reservation. So that's basically it. Where does conservatism fit in? Where does fascism fit in? I'm not there yet. Conservatism, I'll sum up with this. My whole theory, one of my theories of history and ideology is that the right is a reaction to the left. So the right is a reaction to the left. And because the right is a reaction to the left, it's always a little fuzzier and less coherent. And so, do I think conservatism is in large part a form of therapy? I do, but I wasn't ready to pronounce that verdict when I just did that casual post of a typology or taxonomy of ideology. So I hope I'm glad to get back out here. I love doing the podcast. Sometimes I have to absent myself from it due to the day job, but I'll be doing a lot more podcasts in the near future about the topics, whatever topic interests me. So thanks for listening, everybody, and I'll probably see you before Thanksgiving, but if I don't, happy Thanksgiving.